Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute, clinical precision.
Right, yeah, like engineering.
Exactly. You break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line on the dark film, and the doctor just points a pen at it and says, there it is. That's the problem.
It offers this very binary comfort. I mean, it's either broken or it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We desperately want the things that threaten us to be visible,
Right.
to be quantifiable, and most importantly, easily categorized.
Oh, absolutely. We love neat little boxes.
But then you step into fields like neurodevelopment or complex trauma, and suddenly that X-ray machine is completely useless.
Totally.
You're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky. And I bring this up today because that specific feeling, that deep, unsettling realization that the clear-cut categories we rely on to make sense of the world are actually just, completely broken. That is exactly what we are wading into with today's deep dive. I am so glad you're here with us because we are exploring a world that, it looks like classic high fantasy on the surface.
On the surface, yes.
But it operates with the cynical, gritty, almost bureaucratic machinery of our own modern reality. We're looking at a stack of excerpts from Andrzej Sapkowski's Season of Storms.
It is such a brilliant subversion of the entire fantasy genre. I mean, when you think of this genre, you inherently expect a world neatly divided into heroes and monsters, right?
Right. The monsters have fangs, the heroes have swords, and it's all very black and white.
Exactly. The moral lines are drawn in heavy black ink. But the sources we are looking at today force us to examine a terrifying contrast.
A really terrifying contrast.
We are going to look at literal instinct-driven monsters, like creatures engineered to kill, and we're going to compare them against the highly civilized, bureaucratic monstrousness of human institutions.
And to really understand how broken that diagnostic landscape is in this world, we have to start by establishing the baseline, right? What does a literal monster actually look like here?
Yes, we need that baseline.
So the text introduces us to this absolute nightmare of a creature called the IDR. And this opening scene is gripping.
It's intense.
It's actually quite tough to read, honestly, because the text explicitly tells us that the IDR does not exist to eat.
Right.
It does not exist to sustain its species or reproduce. It lives only to kill.
And that is a crucial biological distinction that we really need to unpack here, because in the natural world, a predator hunts strictly for calories.
Right, it's an energy exchange.
Exactly. Stalking, attacking, chasing, wrestling prey to the ground, those are massive expenditures of energy. The text notes that most natural predators are constantly calculating the calorific value of their prey.
Is this worth my time?
Yes. If the prey is too small or the chase takes too long, the predator aborts the attack because the energy spent will actually exceed the energy gained.
You would starve by hunting.
Precisely. But the IDR defies the laws of thermodynamics and biology completely.
So wait, how does it even function then? If it's not getting a caloric return on investment, what is the biological engine driving this thing?
The engine is pure engineered malice.
Wow.
The text describes it as a killing machine driven by the euphoria, literally the ecstasy, of causing pain. It feels a physiological joy when it hears a scream or senses terror.
That is horrifying.
It really is. It is a creature of artificial design, basically a remnant of magical mutation. And that completely separates it from the natural ecosystem.
Right. It doesn't hunt to survive. It hunts because the act of slaughter is its only purpose.
Its sole reason for existing.
And its hunting methods really reflect that terrifying hyper-focus. I mean, it doesn't just run out and bite things like a normal wild animal.
No, it's far too calculated for that.
It lies buried in the sand. It has these hair-like feelers and bristles all over its body that sense vibrations in the ground.
Very insect-like.
Exactly. And it's not just feeling a vague rumbling, It can determine the direction, the speed, and the exact weight of its quarry, just from the way the dirt shakes.
Which is an incredibly sophisticated sensory adaptation.
It's crazy. It calculates a multi-target ambush based entirely on seismic data.
Yeah, it waits for the vibrations of a child, a very small mass, to separate from the group of adults. It knows exactly what it's doing.
Right. And when the child screams and freezes in terror, the Ayadar doesn't even attack her first, which is, what you'd expect a mindless, hungry beast to do.
Right. A starving animal would just take the easy meal.
But it uses her as bait. It just waits. And then a woodcutter pulling a handcart hears the scream, he rushes in to help, and the Ayadar leaps from the sand.
The violence in that moment is so sudden.
It severs a man in half in midair with these razor-sharp mandibles. It's a total bloodbath. And that's exactly when Geralt of Rivia the Witcher, our protagonist, has to intervene.
And the choreography of this intervention is brutal. It's so chaotic.
Yeah, it's not a clean fight at all.
Not at all. Geralt manages to save the mother and the daughter by literally physically throwing the woman into the ferns. But it is not a glamorous, heroic rescue.
No.
The Idria is described as this flat, gray, many-limbed nightmare wrapped in a thick carapace.
Mm-hmm.
Geralt has to hack off its limbs, cleave through its armor, and finally sever its flat head completely just to get it to stop moving.
But here's where the text threw me completely off balance.
Oh.
You would think Geralt would feel like a hero here, right? I mean, he just saved a woman and a little girl from a horrifying death.
You'd definitely expect some relief or pride.
But the source explicitly states he feels profound guilt. And I struggled with this at first. He's a mutant-killing machine himself. He did his job. The monster is dead. Why is he beating himself up over the woodcutter?
Well, it comes down to the burden of calculation.
What do you mean?
Geralt knew the monster was there. He knowingly used the mother and daughter as bait to draw the Idre out of hiding.
Wait, really? So he did exactly what the monster did?
Precisely. That is the terrifying parallel Sapkowski is drawing here. The Idror used the child to bait the woodcutter, right? And Geralt used the family to beat the Adarger. Geralt calculated that his mutant reflexes would be fast enough to intervene and save everyone without a single scratch.
He bet on his own speed.
Yes. He treated the humans as variables in a math equation, and his math was wrong. A man died. A girl is a half-orphan now.
Oh, that makes so much sense now.
Geralt is acutely aware of his own arrogant miscalculation, and it just crushes him. It establishes his conscience. He is designed to kill, but he possesses a deep, complicated humanity.
Okay, I see that. He feels the weight of his actions. But that weight is like immediately contrasted in the very next scene with a human who possesses absolutely zero conscience whatsoever.
The ultimate middle manager.
Yes, the literal monster is dead, so now Geralt has to go deal with the bureaucratic monster.
Right.
Enter Albert Smolka, the newly appointed district reeve.
Smolka is the absolute embodiment of corrupt bureaucracy. The text describes him as stout, unwashed, thick-skinned, and dull.
Just a miserable guy.
Very. And Geralt goes to him to collect the bounty for killing the Idek. They had previously agreed on a payment of 50 crowns for the job.
But Smolka pulls out the official government invoice, and he's written it up for 80 crowns to be drawn from the royal treasury. And he basically gives Geralt this sleazy wink and says, you know, here, I'm giving you a 10-crown bonus. You get 60, I keep 20.
He's skimming right off the top.
He is actively embezzling state funds off the blood and trauma of a horrible monster attack that just left a child fatherless.
And notice how Smolka justifies it when Geralt looks at him in disgust.
Oh, the justification is wild.
Smolka doesn't flinch at all. He claims that state officials actually ought to be wealthy, because the wealthier the official, the greater the prestige to the state itself.
Right.
He has completely weaponized his civic duty to line his own pockets, phrasing his theft as an act of, like, patriotism.
But I don't buy Geralt's reaction here.
What?
Geralt is a heavily armed mutant who just butchered a biological tank in the forest. Why doesn't he just dangle Smolka out a window by his ankles and take the full 80 crowns? Why does he just sigh and sign the falsified document?
Because Geralt understands the socio-political constraints of his existence. Witchers are heavily stigmatized in this world.
Right. People hate them.
Exactly. They rely entirely on societal tolerance to operate. If Geralt assaults a royal official over a discrepancy in an invoice, he isn't just out 20 crowns.
He becomes a criminal.
He becomes a wanted outlaw in the entire district. The state military would hunt him down. And Smolka knows this.
Ah, so Smolka has the leverage.
Yes. He is leveraging the power of the state machinery against Geralt's marginalized status. Geralt has to sign the paper because that is the toll required to exist in a so-called civilized society.
Wow. It just strips away all the glamour of the fantasy hero.
Every bit of it.
He isn't a knight in shining armor at all. He is basically a blue-collar exterminator forced to navigate corrupt middle management just to afford his next meal.
That's exactly what he is.
Which brings us to a fascinating conversation Geralt has shortly after with his friend, the poet Dandelion, about his famous Witcher swords.
Oh, this is where the text really deconstructs the mythology of the fantasy genre.
It's so funny.
Dandelion is an educated man, right? And he starts reciting this highly academic, convoluted theory about Geralt's weapons.
Right. He's quoting university treatises, talking about how the steel is forged from meteorites. He even uses the Latin term Sidereal cadens that fall from the sky.
Yeah, Dandelion goes on and on about how these meteorites pass through the elemental and part-elemental planes as they fall to Earth, absorbing magical energy from the ether.
He talks about the spherical firmament and imbued supernatural forces. I mean, it sounds exactly like the lore you expect when a chosen hero pulls a magical blade from a stone.
Exactly. It's the grand, high-fancy explanation that readers expect. And how does Geralt respond?
He just looks at him and bluntly says, "It's poppycock. It's entirely made up." Gerald explains that meteorites are incredibly rare. You can't just find them lying around under every bush to arm an entire school of monster hunters.
The logistics don't make sense.
Right. He admits that more than half the swords witchers use are just made from ordinary, high-quality magnetite steel from the dwarven hammerworks. There is absolutely zero magical difference between a regular steel sword and a meteorite sword.
But the crucial detail is what Geralt says next. He begs Dandelion to keep his mouth shut and preserve the secret.
Yes.
Mm?
He says he needs people to believe the lie.
Mm.
Because, to use a modern analogy for you listening, it is exactly like the sneaker or luxury fashion market today.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
You go to a store and you see a plain, high-quality white cotton t-shirt for $20. Next to it is the exact same white t-shirt made in the same factory from the same cotton, but it has a little red Supreme Brick logo printed on it, and it costs $400. You are not paying for pure fabric. You are paying a premium for the story, the branding, the idea of the product. Geralt is basically saying, I need clients to think I'm holding the premium, magically imbued meteorite sword, or these corrupt reeves like Smolka will negotiate my wages down to nothing.
It is a PR strategy.
It's totally a PR strategy.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it cuts right to the core of Sapkowski's world building. As Geralt explains it, normality is banality, and banality is cheap.
If they think he's normal, they won't pay him.
Exactly. If clients view him as a guy with a sharp piece of metal, they pay him like a day laborer. But if they view him as a supernatural creature armed with a relic from the heavens, they pay the premium.
Wow.
The monsters are real, but the business of killing them is governed by marketing, brand perception, and wage negotiation.
So if the local clerk is skimming coins, and the hero is relying on deceptive marketing just to get a fair wage, what happens when we look higher up the social ladder?
It only gets worse.
Right. If the small-timers are this corrupt, what are the people in charge doing? Let's move from the mud up to the glittering halls of power and look at the criminal underworld and the monarchy.
To explore this, we follow Geralt into a crisis. His swords, the tools of his livelihood, the very things he needs for his PR have been stolen.
A witcher without his swords is essentially unemployed.
Yes. And this forces him to navigate the region's organized crime network to find them, which leads him to an enclave called Ravelin, the stronghold of the local crime boss, Pyrrol Pratt.
And I found the description of Pyrrol Pratt so surprising. When you think of a fantasy crime lord, you picture someone massive, right? Scarred, surrounded by terrifying thugs, sitting on a throne of skulls.
The classic kingpin.
But Pratt, the text says he looks like a harmless, retired silk merchant. He's wearing a flowery robe and a fez with a little tassel.
A fez.
Yeah. If you saw him in a marketplace, you wouldn't look twice. But then you look at his eyes, and they are described as being as unmoving and dead as a python's.
And Pratt's dialogue is entirely consumed by his physical decay.
Yes, he's falling apart.
He isn't boasting about his wealth or his power. He complains endlessly to Geralt and Dandelion about his stomach ulcers, his phobia of eating, and his herniated disc that prevents him from riding horses.
He even complains about his loss of libido, which is just bad.
Yeah, stating that the effort to maintain it bores him before it even gives him pleasure.
So why is the author doing this? Why make the most powerful criminal in the region so pathetic physically?
Well, it's a manifestation of the toll of power. Contrast Pratt with the IDR. The IDR is pure, hyper-efficient biological energy. Pratt is a human who has achieved ultimate control over his environment, and his reward is physiological misery.
His body is rotting from the inside out.
Exactly. It mirrors his moral decay. And because he is so bored and physically exhausted by crime, he reveals to Geralt that he is pivoting his career.
Right, he tells him he used to run all the brothels and the gambling dens, but now he wants to run for a seat on the town council.
A politician.
Yeah, and he delivers this incredibly cynical, revealing line. It's better to govern from the town hall than from a brothel.
Which is a profound statement on the nature of institutional power. Pratt recognizes that legitimate politics is just a more efficient, socially acceptable form of organized crime.
It's all just a racket to him.
To him, there's no moral distinction between running an extortion ring and collecting municipal taxes. They are both just systems of leverage. And he immediately demonstrates to Geralt exactly how he uses leverage.
Yes, because Geralt needs the information on his stolen swords. Pratt knows exactly where they are. But Pratt doesn't just ask for a bag of gold.
That would be too simple.
Right, he demands a performance. Because Pratt has invited the local industrial elite, the commercial merchants, and the politicians to his stronghold for a banquet.
He's schmoozing his future voters.
Exactly. And to impress them, to secure his political future on that town council, he forces Geralt into an arena, bare-chested and bare-handed, to fight a mutant lizard called a Vigilosaur.
And it is a deliberate, orchestrated spectacle of violence. The Vigilosaur isn't a natural creature, it's a mutant, the size of a Great Dane, with a toothy maw and a whip-like tail that just lacerates Geralt's back.
Geralt is literally fighting for his life.
He's surviving only by improvising. He manages to snap off a broken iron lantern bar from the arena wall and thrust it through the lizard's skull.
And the crowd's reaction is the truly sickening part here.
It really is.
These are the supposed civilized elites of the city, and they go absolutely wild. They are bellowing, cheering, and the text says they even try to wipe up Geralt's spilled blood with their silk handkerchiefs as souvenirs.
If we look closely at that audience, we see that they are just as bloodthirsty as the eye drow we met at the beginning.
Yes.
But their bloodlust is sanitized because it's framed as entertainment. They pay for the privilege of watching a man fight for his life while they sip wine from a balcony. And Pratt gets exactly what he wants from the transaction.
He tells Geralt that the local mayor was so thrilled by the bloodshed that Pratt basically has the town council seat guaranteed.
Mission accomplished for Pratt.
Right. He throws Geralt a check for 200 crowns and tells him his swords are being held at the Borsody Brothers auction house in Novigrad. He literally traded Geralt's pain, his literal blood, for political capital.
It is the absolute commodification of human suffering, which segues perfectly into our look at the legitimate royalty of this world who operate on the exact same principles of commodification.
And before we dive into the specific royal interaction, I want to frame this for you, the listener.
Right, this is important.
The author tackles some heavily debated themes here, specifically regarding reproductive control and bodily autonomy. And regardless of where anyone stands on those issues in the real world, what is genuinely fascinating about this text is how it uses this political debate purely to expose the monarch's economic greed rather than exploring it as a genuine moral dilemma.
Yes, we aren't taking sides on the politics here.
Not at all. We're just reporting what's in the book. The text uses the language of morality as a mask for capitalism.
Precisely. We see this in a scene involving King Belohun of Kerack and the sorceress Coral, whose real name is Litanade.
And Belohun is an interesting king.
Yes, he is a first-generation king. He didn't inherit a long, noble lineage. He inherited the throne from his father, who essentially monopolized maritime trade, crushed his rivals, and then just decided to put a crown on his head and call himself royalty.
A glorified pirate, basically.
Basically.
Belohun is described so vividly. He's skinny and bony, sitting on his throne, looking as majestic as a dung beetle on a cowpath.
Such a great line.
It is. And he is furious with Coral. He calls her in for a royal audience and immediately launches into a tirade against her medical practices, specifically because she provides the women in his kingdom with access to birth control and abortions.
But listen to the specific arguments Belohun uses. He doesn't quote religious texts.
No.
He doesn't argue about the sanctity of life or anything spiritual. His entire argument is rooted in macroeconomics and labor control.
His logic is wild. He literally says that a woman's natural place is locked in the home, kept there by a swollen belly and a horde of offspring.
It's so blunt.
Why? Because if a man knows his wife is trapped at home tending to children, that man has peace of mind. And a man with peace of mind will labor hard, sweat at the grindstone, and increase the wealth and prosperity of the kingdom.
Belohun explicitly admits the quiet part out loud here. He says, I appropriate the results of that hard work.
He just says it.
He argues that giving women reproductive freedom leads to carnal urges, which ruins the men's domestic harmony, which leads to distraction, which ultimately breeds sedition and rebellion against the crown.
He is calculating the economic output of his citizens like livestock.
Exactly like livestock.
To Belohun, women are incubators required to produce future laborers, and men are beasts of burden required to generate current tax revenue. Anything that disrupts the maximum efficiency of that labor pipeline is deemed immoral.
It is a completely transactional view of human existence.
But Coral's reaction is what makes this dynamic so incredible. I expected her to argue with him, right? To defend the women on moral or ethical grounds.
Right, you expect a righteous defense.
But she doesn't. She completely ignores his misogyny. She treats his royal decree like a minor business dispute. She tells him, I charge a fee for the medical help I give women. It's quite a significant source of my income.
She literally calls her practice a free market economy.
She does. She understands that appealing to Belohun's morality is useless because he doesn't have any. So she appeals to his pragmatism by introducing leverage.
And her leverage is immense.
She points out that her income is also the income of the magical chapter and the entire powerful consorority of sorceresses. She casually threatens him, saying that if his oppressive exploitation eventually causes a peasant rebellion, the sorceresses will help put down that rebellion because anarchy disrupts their profit margins too.
But in exchange for that stability, he cannot interfere with her medical monopoly.
She essentially says, you keep exploiting your laborers for taxes, and I'll keep selling them services. We both profit, don't mess with my bottom line. It's so utterly cold.
It's all business.
I have to ask, though, Coral is a wildly powerful sorceress. She can level buildings with her mind. Why does she even bother entertaining the petty demands of a glorified maritime thug like Belohun? Why negotiate it all?
Because power in this world recognizes power, and magic cannot solve supply chains. Coral needs a stable society to acquire gold, raw materials, and political immunity. Belohun provides the infrastructure for that.
So they need each other.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the realization that Pyrrol Pratt the crime lord, King Belohun the monarch, and Coral the magical elite are all playing the exact same game, just wearing different outfits.
Wow, yes. Pratt trades blood for a council seat. Belohun trades reproductive oppression for a docile workforce. Coral trades magical services for gold and political immunity.
Exactly. And the ultimate proof of Belohun's hypocrisy comes right at the end of the negotiation.
Oh man, this part is infuriating.
It really highlights his true colors.
Right after delivering this grand moralizing lecture about the social order and the necessity of women bearing children to keep men working, Belohun casually mentions to Coral that he is marrying a new 17-year-old bride to secure his royal succession. And he explicitly asks Coral to deny these birth control services to his new teenage wife because he wants to make absolutely sure she bears him an heir without interference.
And Coral cheerfully agrees.
She just agrees.
She promises not to give the young queen anything if she comes asking. Because conceding that minor point costs Coral nothing economically, and it secures her broader market access in the entire kingdom.
Their entire ideological conflict just evaporates the moment their personal interests align.
Exactly. Values are just negotiating tactics for them.
So if the crime lords are openly corrupt and the kings are openly transactional, what about the intellectuals? The scholars?
You'd hope they were better.
Right. Surely the elite masters of magic, the people unlocking the secrets to the universe from their ivory towers, are above this kind of petty, greedy commodification.
You would hope so. But as we transition into looking at the intellectual elite, we find that the scholars are perhaps the most terrifying monsters of all.
Why is that?
Because they combine absolute power with an absolute lack of accountability.
Okay, let's talk about Rissberg Castle. Geralt is summoned there, and the text draws this incredible, deliberate visual contrast between the outside world and the inner sanctum.
It's a very striking scene.
Outside the castle, down in the muddy suburbs, there is this bustling, chaotic peasant market. People are yelling, selling cheap charms, basic headache potions, incense, little wooden talismans. It's loud, dirty, disorganized, and very human.
A standard fantasy village scene.
But then Geralt rides through the massive gates into Rissberg complex itself. And it does not look like a fairy tale wizard's tower with glowing crystals and dusty spellbooks.
Not at all.
It looks like a 19th century industrial chemical plant. The text describes factories, massive brick chimneys, and heavy ventilation pipes protruding from the walls.
The environmental descriptions are intense.
The air is thick with the smell of burning sulfur, chlorine, and ammonia. The very ground trembles from subterranean machinery. Sapkowski presents us with a literal magical industrial complex.
Inside this complex, Geralt is brought to meet Grandmaster Ortolan, the oldest living sorcerer.
And he's ancient, right?
Very ancient. He's this gray-bearded guy who essentially achieved immortality by inventing a specific mandrake decoction that stops the aging process.
Wow.
And Ortolan's entire PR brand, his whole public persona, is built on the idea of the democratization of magic. He preaches to anyone who will listen that his goal is to create universal peace by making magic accessible to the common man.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a noble utopian vision.
It sounds great on paper.
However, the reality of what Ortolan actually does painfully contradicts his rhetoric. The text reveals that Ortolan doesn't invent tools for agriculture or medicine to help the common man. He designs horrific weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
Yeah. He invented something called a telekinetic arbalest that basically shoots rapid-fire lead missiles using magical propulsion.
Like a magical machine gun.
Exactly. But the design was so heavy, cumbersome, and useless on a real battlefield that his own artilleryman said it was only fit to be tied to a rock and thrown in a river.
And Ortolan doesn't even care.
No. He just goes back to the drawing board to design something even more lethal. But wait, I have to challenge this.
Go ahead.
If Ortolan is a genius, how can he be so fundamentally stupid? How does he reconcile building killing machines with a philosophy of universal peace?
Well, it's not stupidity. It's heavily compartmentalized intelligence combined with extreme insulation. Ortolan is operating on a twisted version of deterrence theory.
Oh, like the Cold War.
Exactly. It's the exact same logic behind the Manhattan Project or the nuclear arms race. Ortolan believes that the most effective method of preventing wars is to possess a weapon so terrible that no one dares to fight.
Peace through superior firepower.
Yes. He claims he will bring peace to humanity even if he has to destroy half of it first to prove his point. He is completely divorced from the practical reality of violence because he never has to actually witness it.
And we see that absolute disconnect when Geralt confronts him. Geralt pulls out the brass ID tag he ripped off the mutant Vigilosaur he had to kill in Pyrrol Pratt's underground arena.
The one from the banquet.
Right. And the tag clearly reads Risberg Mark IV. It is undeniable proof that the mages engineered this monster that is now being used for illegal gladiatorial death matches.
Geralt demands accountability. He throws the tag on the table and asks how many of these genetically engineered horrors are wandering the forests, murdering innocent people.
And how does the enlightened Grandmaster react? Does he express horror? Does he apologize?
No, he throws a massive childish tantrum.
It's embarrassing to read.
Ortolan starts weeping. He screams at Geralt for killing it. He calls the lizard a work of art, a miracle of genetics.
He doesn't care about the people it hurt at all.
Not even a little. He is entirely divorced from the reality of what the creature actually does to human flesh. To Ortolan, the theoretical beauty of the magical engineering is infinitely more valuable than the human lives the creature destroys.
He dismisses Geralt as a layman with a shallow mind who simply cannot comprehend the genius of creation. It is the ultimate expression of institutional arrogance.
Truly.
The mages play God in their sterile laboratories, completely insulated from the bloody consequences of their creations. But those consequences are about to become the central conflict of the narrative.
Right, because after Ortolan's tantrum, Geralt is pulled aside into a secret off-the-books meeting by two mid-level mages, Pinety and Zara.
And before we get to what they say, we have to talk about the decor in this private room.
Oh.
Because the author weaves in this brilliant, subtle joke. The room is decorated with erotic prints on the walls. There are delicate models of sailing ships in glass bottles on the shelves. And mounted above the desk is a stuffed 14-pound trout caught on a fly.
Which is a direct callback to the scene with Coral.
Exactly. When we first met Coral, she was listing off her highly specific, totally trivial criteria for what makes a real man.
Oh, right.
She stated with absolute authority that a real man must be an enthusiastic fly fisher. He must build ships and bottles, and he must appreciate erotic prints.
And here we are.
Here we are in Mage Piney's room, and it's literally a checklist of Coral's exact definition.
It's a wonderful piece of world building. It shows how interconnected, insular, and gossipy the magical community is. They all know each other's preferences and quirks.
That is cool.
It really is, but the atmosphere in that room shifts rapidly because the contents of the meeting are deadly serious. Pinety and Zora admit the real reason Geralt was summoned to Risberg.
The real reason.
They confess they have a Goetia problem.
Which is demon summoning.
Precisely. Goetia is the practice of invoking a demon, extracting it from its home dimension, and attempting to bind its will for magical use.
Which sounds incredibly dangerous.
It is highly illegal, strictly prohibited across the continent, and carries severe penalties except, conveniently, at Rissberg, where the mages claim it is done strictly under controlled academic experimental conditions.
But, shocker, they lost control.
Surprise, surprise.
Pinety and Zara admit that someone at Rissberg summoned a demon and purposefully let it possess a human being. The term they use for this possessed person is an enurgement.
An enurgement.
And this enurgement has escaped the facility, fled into the remote Tukaj Hills, and is currently committing absolutely horrific massacres among the peasant population.
And here is where we reach the absolute nadir of institutional corruption. Think about the power of these mages.
Okay.
They can teleport, they can level cities, they can divine the future. They know exactly who the enurgement is and what it is doing. They could easily track down and destroy the demon using their own magic.
So why don't they?
They refuse to do it.
Because if they fly out into the woods and magically blow up one of their own colleagues, it creates a massive public scandal.
A huge PR disaster.
It exposes the fact that they are conducting highly illegal, incredibly dangerous experiments. The kings would crack down on them, they would lose their funding and their autonomy.
Exactly. So what is their solution? They secretly hired Geralt, the blue-collar, stigmatized mutant they openly despise, to sweep it under the rug.
They outsource the dirty work.
They need him to track the possessed mage and chop him into pieces with a steel sword, completely off the books.
It is the perfect modern corporate analogy. Imagine a massive tech giant secretly developing a highly dangerous, unregulated rogue AI in a basement lab.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
The AI escapes and starts wreaking havoc. But instead of the company publicly admitting their mistake, shutting down the servers, and taking a massive hit to their stock price, they quietly hire a freelance hacker off the dark web to destroy the code so their shareholders and regulators never find out.
It's an airtight analogy. The intellectual elites justify their horrific, unethical experiments under the guise of progress for humanity. But the moment their hubris causes a disaster, they rely on the working class to clean up the blood and assume all the physical risk.
They don't want any of the blowback.
None. They view Geralt not as a hero, but as an expendable sanitation worker for their magical hazardous waste.
So the elites make a mess to protect their PR. But what does that mess actually look like for the people on the ground who have to live with it? Because now Geralt has to actually go out and do the job.
Yes.
Which brings us to the grim reality of the machine.
And just the logistical process of doing the job is an ordeal. Because the Tukaj Hills cover a vast territory, the mages force Geralt to use their magical teleportation network daily so he can patrol different sectors.
And I love how Sapkowski strips all the glamour out of teleportation here.
Oh, it's terrible.
In most fantasy, teleporting is like Star Trek, right?
Huh.
You shimmer and appear somewhere else instantly. Here is a miserable, terrifying, physical traumatic experience.
It's very traumatic.
The source material quotes a medical text saying that before teleporting, a traveler must, without fail, defecate and empty the bladder.
Which really speaks to the immense physiological strain of having your molecular structure torn apart and forced through another dimension.
Yeah, Geralt has to walk his horse into this iridescent, glowing portal, and then he is violently plunged into cold, timeless, silent blackness.
It sounds like sensory deprivation torture.
He loses all his senses. He feels like he's being crushed. It's an agonizing, nauseating daily commute just to get to the logging camps to do his job.
When he finally arrives, shaken and sick, he teams up with the local law enforcement, Constable Franz Torkil.
And Torkil's a great character.
He is a fascinating character. He is a pragmatic, highly observant man who has seen a lifetime of violence in the backwoods. He isn't educated at a university, but he possesses a deep, cynical wisdom about how power operates.
He sees right through the BS.
He does, and he describes the massacres to Geralt in chilling detail.
Yeah, this isn't just a monster killing for food, and it isn't even like the idea of killing for joy. This is deliberate, sadistic, theatrical slaughter.
It's a statement.
Torkil describes how the victims are found. They have their heel cords severed from behind so they can't run. They are eviscerated, their chests ripped open. And then, most horrifyingly, the demon systematically decapitates them and stacks their heads in neat little pyramids.
The scale of it is staggering. 9 people dead in one settlement, 12 in another, 15 in a third.
The sheer volume of the slaughter is meant to overwhelm. But Torkel isn't fooled by the mystery. He knows the mages at Rissberg are behind this, even if he doesn't know the specifics of Goetia.
He knows who holds the real power.
He tells Geralt that wizard magic is like a sack of vipers. Eventually, something venomous is going to crawl out and bite the people who can't afford to live in stone castles.
And Torkel gives Geralt a very stark, genuine warning. He says if something doesn't go right, they'll be looking for a scapegoat, and you have all the makings of one.
Which is terrifyingly true.
Torkel understands that the institutional machine will always, always protect itself first. If Geralt fails, or if the secret gets out, Rissberg will absolutely frame the mutant witcher for the murders to protect their own reputation.
Torkel represents the grounded reality of the working class who suffer the consequences of the elite's hubris, but the text provides an even more chilling illustration of this dynamic.
Yes.
And for me, this was the most unsettling detail in the entire text. It wasn't the descriptions of the gore or the severed heads, it's what happens after the violence.
The aftermath.
Geralt and the mage Pinedy visit a charcoal burner settlement called Rogovizna, where 15 people had just been massacred by the demon.
Now, logically, you would expect to arrive at a ghost town. A place frozen in mourning, paralyzed by terror, abandoned by sensible people fleeing for their lives.
Instead, Geralt arrives at a bustling, noisy construction site. The workers who call themselves smokers are incredibly busy building a new, massive dome of wood to burn charcoal.
Business as usual.
The air is thick with acrid smoke. Men are shouting, carrying logs. They're working at a frantic pace as if absolutely nothing happened.
It's so jarring.
When Geralt, confused, asks Pinedy where the victims are, the mage just points a finger at some fresh, disturbed yellow sand right next to them. The workers are building the new, smoking charcoal kiln directly over the sandy burial mounds of the 15 people who were just slaughtered.
It is the starkest, most devastating illustration of the intersection of capitalism, survival, and tragedy. The local smelting industry desperately needs charcoal to function.
The economy doesn't care.
The macroeconomic machine of the region abhors a vacuum. There is no time to pause production. There is no time to grieve or build monuments. New workers are immediately brought in to replace the dead, and the machine grinds on.
The imagery of that smoking kiln burning directly over the fresh graves of murdered peasants is such a powerful metaphor for how this entire system operates. It just consumes human lives, turns them into fuel, and burns them up to keep the economy moving. But looking at all this misery, it really made me question Geralt's motivations. Does Geralt actually care about these 15 dead charcoal burners? Or is he just enduring the terrifying teleportation and the extreme danger purely for the 500-crown paycheck the mages promised him?
It's likely a complex mixture of both, which is what makes him compelling. Geralt has his internal code, and we saw his genuine guilt over the Idjur attack earlier.
Right, he felt terrible about the woodcutter.
He wants to stop the suffering. But he is also a pragmatist trapped within the very same economic machine. Geralt, the charcoal burners, Constable Torkel, they're all just cogs surviving in a brutal ecosystem engineered by the powerful people at the top.
Everyone has a role to play.
The workers produce the resources, the mages create the disasters, and the Witcher is paid to clean up the mess so the cycle can continue unabated.
Okay, so we've seen mages play God with genetics and demons. We've seen kings play God with the reproductive rights of their subjects. Now let's see what happens when ordinary, wealthy merchants try to play God with the forces of nature itself.
This brings us to the climax of the thematic journey, which takes place entirely on the water. Geralt and his dwarf companion, Dario Bach, are traveling on a passenger river cutter called the Prophet Libiota.
First of all, I love the little detail about the ship itself. Instead of a traditional majestic mermaid figurehead on the prow, the ship has a carving of a bald old man with a huge nose.
So strange.
It's a great subtle clue about the ship's owner, Kevin Van Vliet. He's a merchant who is so desperate to kiss up to the local priests and ensure good business that he puts a religious prophet on his boat instead of a nautical symbol.
Always working an angle.
Van Vliet is traveling with two other wealthy merchants, Javilfish and Petru Kabin.
These three merchants present Geralt with a very noble, heroic narrative. They claim they have pooled their resources to finance a daring rescue mission.
A noble quest.
They tell Geralt they are trying to save the daughter of a wealthy elven furrier who is supposedly kidnapped by a mythical creature known as an aguara, a shape-shifting she-fox.
But Geralt immediately sees through the lie, because he knows the biology and the lore of the monsters in his world.
He's the expert.
He explains to them that aguaras do indeed kidnap elven children, but they never do it for ransom. They kidnap them for biological reproduction.
Which sounds impossible.
Well, aguaras cannot reproduce normally, so they take an elven child and magically mutate them over time into a new aguara. Once the child is taken, the process begins and the child is effectively gone forever. A rescue mission is biologically impossible.
Cornered by Geralt's technical knowledge, the merchants drop the noble facade entirely and reveal the horrific truth of their cargo.
And it is horrific.
They didn't rescue a human or an elven girl. They purchased an actual aguara cub, a 12-year-old girl who is halfway through her painful transformation into a mythical monster from some soldiers who had captured her in the woods.
And what was their grand business plan? Did they want to study it, return it to the wild? No.
Of course not.
They want to sail down the river to the massive cosmopolitan city of Novigrad and sell this terrified, kidnapped, mutating child to a city menagerie for a massive profit.
A zoo.
They looked at a mythical, magical apex predator and thought, hey, we can make a quick buck off this by sticking it in a cage. I have to say, it is spectacularly stupid.
Yeah.
How could men who are smart enough to run shipping empires be this blind to the danger?
Because it is the ultimate culmination of our deep dive's central theme, the absolute blinding power of human hubris and capitalist greed.
They thought they were untouchable.
These merchants did not view the aguara as a living, feeling creature, nor did they respect it as a terrifying existential threat. They viewed it entirely as inventory.
Just a product to be sold.
They truly, deeply believed that their accumulated gold, their sturdy ship, and their social status protected them from the raw, untamed power of the natural world. They thought nature was just another market to be exploited.
Geralt realizes instantly that the mother aguara will be hunting them to get her cub back. He demands they release the creature immediately.
It's the only logical move.
He and the dwarf force their way below deck to free it. But it's too late. They find the cub dead on the floorboards. A terrified crewman named Parley had snapped her neck just to stop her from screaming and drawing attention to the ship.
The murder of the cub is the point of no return. The merchant's ledger is balanced in blood, and nature's vengeance arrives instantly. But notice how Sapkowski writes this vengeance.
Yeah, it isn't a giant monster bursting out of the water to bite the ship in half.
It is much more subtle.
The scene shifts from a tense standoff into sheer atmospheric psychological horror. The mother aguara strikes by summoning a massive, terrifying, magical squall.
The weather just turns instantly.
The wind whips up out of nowhere, lightning flashes, the river turns violent. The ship is tossed around so violently that Geralt thinks the hull is going to splinter into pieces.
Now, you might ask, wouldn't a storm of that magnitude destroy the very ship holding the body of her cub?
Right, isn't she risking her own child's remains by doing that?
Yes, but that's the point. This isn't a calculated, logical naval engagement. It's raw, unfiltered, apocalyptic grief. The aguara doesn't care about the structural integrity of the boat. She is manifesting her rage through the elements.
The captain desperately manages to steer the ship into a narrow inlet to escape the worst of the wind. But as the storm breaks and the water calms, the crew realizes something is profoundly wrong.
The atmosphere changes completely.
The compass needle starts spinning wildly. The water around the ship changes. It's suddenly covered in thick green duckweed. The air smells foul and rank, like stagnant swamp water. The trees on the riverbank are gone, replaced by strange cypresses covered in eerie red flowers.
They aren't on the physical river anymore. The grieving mother hasn't just attacked them physically. She has trapped them in a localized magical illusion, a pocket dimension of her own making.
The final chilling image of this sequence is Geralt looking out over the swampy water and seeing a woman in a long, clinging dress standing perfectly still on the bare bough of a dead tree.
That image is so haunting.
When the terrified captain frantically steers the boat away from the bank, Geralt blinks, the woman vanishes, and a large black fox with a white-tipped tail slinks silently into the thicket. The mother's just watching them, silently, waiting.
It is a masterful conclusion to the arc. The merchants thought they were the masters of their universe.
They thought they had all the power.
They thought they dictated terms, negotiated prices, and generated profit without consequence. But they stumbled blindly into a realm governed by primal emotion and ancient magic, and they realized too late that their ledgers, their coins, and their social status are utterly useless there.
Okay, let's synthesize this incredible journey we've been on. Through all these excerpts, we started with the Idra, a literal biological monster that kills because its engineered nature demands it.
It feels joy in the slaughter.
But then we met Albert Smolka, skimming coins off a family's tragedy. We met Pyrrol Pratt, throwing desperate men to mutant lizards for political polling points.
And King Belohun.
Right, King Belohun, calculating the economic output of his kingdom by treating women as breeding stock. We saw Grandmaster Ortolan weeping over the destruction of a bioweapon while ignoring the dead peasants it produced. And finally, we saw wealthy merchants kidnap a mythical child for a zoo exhibit.
The text forces us to reconsider our fundamental definitions of what a monster is. The true monsters in this world aren't always the ones with fangs, stingers, or magic spells.
No, they wear nice clothes.
Very often, the most dangerous, destructive monsters are the ones wielding ledger books, royal crowns, and institutional authority. Because a monster like the Eater can only kill what is directly in front of it.
The damage is localized.
But institutional monsters, their destruction is systemic. It grinds down entire societies, building smoking kilns over the bodies of the working class without ever missing a beat.
It is truly brilliant world building. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over on your own as you go about your day.
If we look at the two extremes we've discussed today, a literal monster like the EDR or the grieving Mother Aguara, who act purely on primal instinct, biology, and raw emotion.
Right.
Versus the humans like King Belohun, Grandmaster Ortolan, and the merchants, who cause mass suffering purely out of calculated greed, vanity, and the desire for control. Which one is truly the more terrifying force in a society? A creature that kills because it must, or a human who destroys because it's profitable?
That is the profound question at the heart of this world. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. It's been a dark, fascinating, and incredibly complex trip. I hope you walk away questioning the mechanisms of the monsters in our own world. And the next time you find yourself trying to neatly categorize the good guys and the bad guys, just remember, you might be stepping into a landscape where the X-ray machine is broken. Until next time.